Okay, all right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Steve Stidham, and I'm a part of the leadership team for the Cincinnati Post. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar sponsored by SAME Cincinnati, and a big thanks to National for helping us panel together. We're thrilled to have with us what promises to be an inspiring and impactful session at the SBC, or the Small Business Conference. This past year, we saw the group that you're going to see speak, and we got so much from that we wanted to share the value that we saw with our post and community. We have an exceptional panel lined up, leaders and innovators in their fields who bring a wealth of experience and fresh perspective. So it'll be really exciting. At the end of the presentation, we'll use the chat function to collect questions and present them to the panelists. So any question that you have, throw it in the chat, and then we'll distribute it as they come in. So thanks for being here. We're excited to get started, and I will pass it over to your moderator, and that is Lloyd Caldwell.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Let's go to the next slide. Let's stay on this one for just a moment. This panel is very pleased to speak with you today. The panel is brought to you by the National Academy of Construction in partnership with SAME, and we're going to speak to you a little bit later in the presentation about that partnership between the two organizations. I want to thank Chelsea Gallion, Steve Stidham, Kayla Tucker, and other leaders of Cincinnati Post who reached out to us for this presentation. Also, thanks to Bell Fabrero at the SAME National. Next slide, please. If you're on a VPN connection, I'm told that you may have problems with that. So if you have an alternative way of connecting, I recommend you give that a shot. To reiterate what Steve said, please submit your questions in the chat function, and you can submit them as they arise and come to your mind during the presentation. And you can also submit follow-on questions if you have an interest to follow up on things. These slides will be sent to those that are attending this webinar after it's concluded, and it's also being recorded for future use. Next slide, please. I'll be the moderator today, Lloyd Caldwell. I'm retired from the Corps of Engineers, where I led the defense programs worldwide for the Corps of Engineers. I've been in Cincinnati a number of times over the years on business, and have a number of friends and old colleagues there. So I'm pleased to be talking with our friends in Cincinnati. I currently work as a senior advisor and member of boards for ProtoServe, Terra Construction, and Dawson Associates. Bob, next slide, please.
Are you going to speak to this, Lloyd, or do you want me to do it?
Yeah, Bob, if you will, please.
Okay, so I'm Bob Preto. I'm chairman of Strategic Program Management. Earlier in my career, I was chairman of Parsons Brinckerhoff, senior vice president of Fluor, and I sit on a number of engineering company boards. I'm a boy from the Bronx, so I'm a Yankee fan by birth, and I try to spend as much time as I can on African safaris and river cruises. And when I'm not doing that, I'm writing, including extensively for the National Academy of Construction.
So Bob didn't say so, but I believe he's the author of, is it 11 books?
11 books, yeah.
11 books on management, and over 900 articles that you can find online. They're all very insightful. He's been a member of the National Academy of Construction since 2011. Next slide, please. Dave?
Yeah, I'm Dave Nash. Currently, I'm running my own consulting company. I'm from Ohio, Mount Vernon, Ohio, which not many people heard about, but it's 48 miles northeast of Columbus. I spent 33 years in the Navy, and right out of college, and then I went to the private. I've been in the private sector ever since. Did things like construction companies, construction management, program management. I've done 7 startups. Some of them got sold. Some of them just disappeared because they weren't a good idea, but have had a lot of experience in trying to get things going. I also been on boards, corporate boards, for 20 years. I tend to do privately held boards. They're more interesting to me. The most interesting one was explosive ordnance demolition. I don't know anything about it, and I survived, and I have all my fingers and toes, so I thought that was a very interesting endeavor. But I did want to mention that when I was, it says I was a driving instructor during college. It's a task that if you can survive the first 2 weeks and with your sanity, you can make it the whole way. But I learned something. People, when they'd start to drive the first time, we'd be wobbling back and forth across the highway. And I figured out what they were doing. They kept looking right side the fender, looking at the line, trying to line up with the line in the center of the road. And when I could convince them to look to the horizon and have a goal, things got much better. So that seemed to work pretty well for me later in other endeavors.
Thanks, Dave. Dave has been a member of the National Academy of Construction since 2003. Mark, next slide, please.
Yeah, my name is Mark Hanley, and like Dave Nash, I spent 32 years in the Navy Civil Engineer Corps, and I think Dave Nash taught me to look at the horizon early in my career. I had the privilege of working for him twice, once in Hawaii in charge of a construction office out there, and then as an executive assistant when he was the chief of civil engineers and commander of NAVFAC. But anyway, I'm within SAME. I've been a member of SAME since I think my days as an ensign, when they told me to, I think they said, "Ensign Hanley, go get the van. You're going to a meeting today." And I went to my first SAME meeting in Okinawa, Japan. And then of late, I followed Dave Nash's footsteps as national president a few years ago. Since we're at Cincinnati, although I say in there I'm a 49ers fan, I'm actually lived right outside of Cincinnati in Finneytown when I was a little kid. And just to give you an idea of how long ago, Pete Rose was a rookie the year I lived there. And I probably had a dozen Pete Rose rookie cards. I traded him away because he was just a rookie. I didn't care about him. Should have kept a few of those, as well as Johnny Bench and Joe Morgan. But big Red Machine fan, better than any Yankees team, Bob. Sorry. But the 1970s Big Red Machine was probably the best out there. But anyway, so I came into the Navy through ROTC, and between my junior and senior year, I did a foreign exchange crew with the Australian Navy. So I was on an Australian destroyer for 2 months, and I had the privilege of celebrating my 21st birthday with the Australians, and you can just imagine what that's like. They had so much fun with me that they decided to do it twice. The day after was, because of the international date line, was actually my birthday back in the United States. So they did it twice. So it was real good. And then I credit a lot of my success to marrying up. My wife is a dean at Old Dominion University here in Norfolk.
Thank you, Mark. Mark has been a member of the National Academy of Construction since 2020, and he was also, many of you will know him as a former SAME president in the year 2020 to 2021. And by the way, I think I neglected to mention I'm a member of the National Academy of Construction since 2018. So the National Academy of Construction currently has over 400 members. It's a group of recognized construction industry leaders from industry, academia, and government. It has a high bar for membership based on one's experience and contribution to the industry. And many of the members of the National Academy are also members of other advisory and leadership boards within the nation. This slide simply shows you what the mission, the vision, and the guiding principles are of the National Academy, and the ways in which you can access the information that the Academy makes available from the experience of these leaders. It's a collaborative partner with SAME, and I'm going to turn to Mark on the next slide to talk a little bit about that partnership. Next slide, please.
Yeah, thanks, Lloyd. So I lead the collaboration between the National Academy of Construction and SAME. We have a signed partnership agreement where we support each other. And if you look at it, there's a lot of similarities between SAME and their mission and the National Academy of Construction. We know that the SAME is really, leading collaboration support of national security priorities, right? And it's about national security. It's about our nation's economic and security interests at home and abroad. The new strategic plan that just came out talks about driving partnerships, delivering solutions for critical infrastructure, and developing people. And that lines up very well with what you see there for the National Academy of Construction, really transforming our industry to build a better nation, really to get the strength within our industry so that we get better infrastructure. And again, that infrastructure drives, not only our security, but also our economic security as well. And again, I think Lloyd talked about it, it's about professional excellence. These are people who have been successful throughout their entire careers, and now they're giving back to the industry through the selfless service. As we mentioned, Bob has probably authored, I think, about half of what we call our executive insights, which kind of give an insight as to a specific issue or a specific challenge within the design and construction industry. We talked about supporting innovation and then developing talent. And, we've got a series called Ask Me Anything, where really targeting young professionals, and we interface with the young professional community of interest to, kind of talk about what their career is, and then just kind of ask and answer questions for either aspiring engineers that are in their, later years in college, or new engineers that are recently into the industry. And then also just advancing our profession. And that's really looking at, what are the biggest challenges within our industry. And to that extent, just to give you a snapshot, the SAME's Executive Advisory Council, which, if you're not familiar with, that has the service engineer chief, so head of the Corps of Engineers, NAVFAC, Air Force, as well as the VA, and a couple of others, GSA, along with SAME leadership to talk about what are the biggest challenges. And I represent the National Academy of Construction on that advisory group to look at what are the challenges that they're having. A lot of these are coming up through the construction community of interest. And again, what we try to do is connect the people within the National Academy that have that expertise with people within SAME that can, so that they can support those initiatives. So great partnership, been going pretty well. It's probably one of the best partnerships that SAME has, as well as the National Academy of Construction has. So.
Thanks, Mark. Next slide, please. Here's what the panel hopes that you take away from this session today. We know that good leadership is a hallmark of successful organizations, and successful companies give attention to leader development, but individuals have to give attention to their own personal development as well. So we hope that you get these points about your development, your company's development, and how those are important to your company and their success out of this session today. The panel intends that this session will be a conversational session. When we go to the next slide, we're not going to have a lot of slides to go through. We're going to have one slide that lays out the points, and the panel members will speak to that. Dave, do you want to speak a little bit about what the intent is for this session today?
Yes, as he said, our intent, this is not a lecture. This is just a sharing of experiences, insights, mistakes in my case, and lessons learned. And so we're just trying to share. So we're not talking at you, we're sort of hopefully talking with you. And my personal opinion is there's all different styles of leadership, and I've worked for different styles of leadership over the years. And what I'd encourage you all to do is to develop your own style of leadership. It's really based on your personality. It's based on the environment you're in, the situation you're in. So leadership is not something you can, in my opinion, you can learn out of a book. You learn a lot of it through experience and through example by others, and just by plain making mistakes and learning what works and doesn't work.
Thanks, Dave. Next slide, please. So these are the points that the panel is going to speak to you today. And so I'll turn it over first to Bob, if you'll lead off this discussion. And again, just to remind you, this is going to be a conversational presentation. Most of it will be focused on the points on this slide. And as you listen to it and questions come to mind, please put those in the chat box, and we'll get to them at the end. Thank you. Bob, please.
Yeah, I'm not going to go through these points in order, but I have a couple that I want to highlight. But let me kind of start by saying A great quote that came from one of my mentors, Jim Lammy, who several of you knew. If you're not growing, you're dying. And I think that's true not just of organizations, but of individuals. I don't care how old you get or how many times you change in your career. Learning is a lifelong exercise, and quite frankly, it's that personal development that I think is essential. In organizations, that growth is not just about size; it's also about capabilities. And as you're thinking about how you're expanding the capabilities in your organizations today, think about things like, something that's in our face every day. How's artificial intelligence going to change your business? How's it going to change your staff mix? And how's it going to change the skills and capabilities you're looking for? I had the opportunity in 2023 to spend 6 months serving as a full-time executive coach for a new CEO. It was a 50-year-old family-owned firm. He was the first non-family CEO. And really, the things that he did, because all I did is provide advice, was he reinforced the culture, which had been strong for 50 years. And I think culture is a very important thing. And then second, he focused on his leadership team. So part of him developing himself was him developing the team that was going to follow him. The next tier had performance objectives that cascaded down from his and the company's. And I think most importantly, as I observed this firsthand every day, is they learned by helping each other. And I think that's also a trait of good leadership. It's having that team and having that team help each other. I had an opportunity early in my career to spend 3.5 weeks on the road around the U.S. visiting 1 to 2 offices a day when I was at Parsons Brinckerhoff, and meeting with the young staff in the offices, young here being defined as the under 30-year-olds. And I was doing that because all of our stats said that we were losing them at twice the rate of the general turnover in the firm. So something had to be corrected there. So we identified them, met with them. We tried to engage. I think that was the first thing. And then we brought a dozen of them back to New York. And we challenged them. And to me, that challenge was made with their managers in the room. And something that I said to them at that time was that if you don't screw up at least once a day, you're not doing your job. You're not stretching yourself. Now, the reaction on their managers' faces was quite interesting, to say the least. It was actually a very good barometer to see who your better managers were and who the managers were you probably needed to change in the firm. But there was a corollary to screwing up once a day, and that was you had to tell. And by telling, you were able to get help to fix the problem. You're going to get help in learning, and you're going to get help in how we could take the things that were working well and really embed them inside the organization. So I think leaders have to have those traits, but I also think one other, which is on the screen here, which is patience and persistence. I think about this as two sides of the same coin, if you will. And I think of the edge of the coin as kind of a measure of the intensity of each of those things. One side, you can argue lower intensity, the other side, very high intensity, have to get it done now, it's very important. And I think that's something a leader has to not only understand, but has to be able to shift between those two modes of strategic patience and strategic persistence, if you will. So leaders can't stand still. I said in my opening remarks, I was a boy from the Bronx, so a Yankee fan by birth, are doing reasonably well this year. But in baseball in general, what does an outfielder do when the batter hits the ball? What's his first reaction? He doesn't run towards home plate. He runs towards the outfield. And the reason is until he gets a good sight on where that ball's going, he wants to make sure he's going to be able to keep it in front of him. And once you're in motion, changing direction is a lot easier. And so too many leaders, in my experience, can be frozen. Leaders need to act. And the biggest challenge leaders have in that acting is that it involves personal risk. And delegating also involves personal risk. So leadership development, both of your team and of yourself, is very much about taking personal risk. So maybe I'll stop there, Lloyd, and let you move on.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Dave,
Yeah, I'll just start off by saying I used to work for Bob. I was one of the presidents of one of his companies. He never told me I could make mistakes, but maybe I missed that lecture.
You weren't
But
paying
he
attention,
was a
Dave.
good boss.
You weren't paying attention. That was the problem.
Well, that was probably it too. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about risk. It's one of my favorite subjects, particularly when I'm on corporate boards and managing risk. You can't avoid it. That's obvious. I believe that you got to understand it and you got to know how to manage it. And you got to be able to figure out what do you do if the wheels come off. And so one of the things I do is large program management. And one of the things that we do in a program management plan is put together a risk assessment and then put together a risk management plan. So if you think you can avoid risk, you're in the wrong business, because this is what we do: construction, design, all these things, military, all these things we do. There's risk associated. Understanding risk and managing is more of an art than a science, and I'm sure that the academics would never agree with that, but it's more of a gut feel. It's just like program management is more of an art than a science, where project management is more of a science. So I just encourage you to think about risk no matter what you're doing. I do now. I didn't used to, and sometimes got in some real pickles. The other thing is that one of the things I learned was about delegating and trust. It's being able to trust and to delegate, allow limited failure, plan to recover. All those things are really key, I think, to being a long-term leader. You can yell and scream if things go bad, but it doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help you, and it doesn't help them. So to me, I always learned that it was a good idea to be prepared if things didn't work out quite as well as they should have, to be able to recoup and regroup and be able to overcome it. So risk is important. It's a part of our business. It's a part of our profession, but it's manageable.
thank you, Dave. Mark? You're muted, Mark.
Thanks. I think I figured out the pecking order. So Bob had Dave work for him. I worked for Dave. So I think I'm bottom of the totem pole, which I'm very happy with. Means I'm probably the youngest guy in the group, but that's another topic. Hey, we talk about your technical proficiency, engineers, architects, being a professional engineer, registered architect, and even if it's if you're a marketing professional as well, you talk about your profession, but I want to talk a little bit about the value of leadership. And, kind of came clear to me. So I just finished my career in the Navy and I was interviewing with companies. And actually, Dave Nash introduced me to Jane Penny. If you remember Jane Penny, another past president of SAME and a member of the National Academy of Construction. She interviewed me, and we were talking about me leading the federal energy market for AECOM, and we had a good discussion about energy and where it was going and the strategic vision of the services. But at the end of that interview, Jane looked me in the eye and says, Mark, we need a lot of things, but the number one thing we need within our company is leadership. And she kind of went on to say, you're going to be hired to do this job, but I can tell you that we're going to tap you to do a lot of other things because they valued the leadership. So I think as you look at developing your own skill set, leadership is one of those important skill sets that you develop. And there's lots of resources. We'll talk about those here in a little bit. But then the other one that Jane Penny did to me, which, I think a lot of people, she did this to a lot of people, the voluntold piece. I think I'd been working for AECOM for about 2 months. And she looked at me and says, hey, we need you to take over the Energy and Sustainability Community of Interest. It was called a committee back then. But the person who was currently running it was going to be the next president of SAME. And so she just said, hey, I need you to do that. So sure enough, I was in there and leading it. And then Jane kept talking to me about eventually being the president of SAME. And at the time, that wasn't a possibility, right? Because the bylaws within SAME said you had to be a post president in order to be the president of SAME. And throughout my military career, because I moved so many times and had deployments, I got to be a vice president of post, but by the time I came president, I got orders and moved. Well, sure enough, Jane Penny got that changed so that she removed that barrier, which is another role of leaders, is to remove barriers. And that gave me the path to be president of SME, which I thoroughly enjoyed from that perspective. But the other one that she kind of talked to me was the value of succession planning and how you have to do that. And, you know, one of the things as I worked up to become president, I looked at who are the people that are going to follow me. And one of the things I'm probably most proud of in my SAME career is the 4 presidents that came after me: Cindy Lincecum, Charlie Parham, Sharon Kroc, and now Mike Hufstetler. I either nominated them or I was the endorser for their nomination as they became president of SAME. I've now passed that baton to them in order to do that. But I will tell you a quick story about Mike Hufstetler. When I was I think I was the president-elect at SAME. I went out to a post meeting in San Diego, and I had known Mike Hufstetler because he was the membership community of interest chair. And I sat down with him, and actually his boss was at the table, and I talked about him having a leadership role at the national level, you know, being one of our vice presidents and maybe being president as well. And as you can imagine, that discussion, he denied it, of course. He says, no, there's no way I could possibly do that. You know, that's not me. I don't think I could possibly do that. And I went on to have a few more conversations with him. And it kind of goes back to that patience and persistence. I just continually talked to him about leadership roles within SAME. And then for those of you who are at JETC, he became our national president this year. So that kind of ties in, you know, from a leadership perspective, the importance of succession planning and being patient in succession planning. You got to lay some groundwork. You can't just talk to people once and have them, take your role. You got to help them develop. You got to break down some of those barriers as you kind of go forward. So just a couple of thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Bob, we're going to come back to you now. And can you talk to us about whatever you want to talk to on this slide, but what's the spectrum of leader development within a firm, and how does that relate to a company's success?
So, first of all, I think leadership is really the lifeblood of an organization. That leadership has to be consistent with the values and beliefs of the firm, obviously. When it's not, that's when you see firms get into trouble. But, you know, I reflect back on that group of a dozen young folks that I picked out of, you know, touring around the country. Today, those dozen folks that we brought back to New York for 1 week to really empower them, all of them are at least senior vice presidents in the industry somewhere. So, and were they that much brighter than the other young people that we met? No, but they had a spark to them. They had some passion. But I think what we did, even more than giving them some training, is we empowered them. We told them it was okay to take some personal risk. And Dave, I want to, if I can, I want to pick up on your risk point just for a second. So yesterday I taught a class for an executive thing that Columbia does in construction management. And my class yesterday was on risk. So it's like fresh in the mind. And I teach a risk class every year, and I have an image I use, which is a round table with 6 seats around it. And the 6 seats represent 6 different perspectives. And if you will, the risk is sitting in the middle of that round table. And without going into what those perspectives are, I think as we look at risk, as we take risk, we have to make sure that we don't have cognitive lock, that we can only look at things from one perspective. You have to force yourself to step back and sit in those other chairs and look at risk in different ways. You know, as a young engineer, we did literally on the drafting board reviews. And I couldn't stand next to the draftsman. I was the young guy. So I had to look at the drawing upside down from the top of the drafting board. And I would always find things that everybody else missed simply because I had a different perspective. And I think that's very important. Mark, you when you talked about leadership, my last book, this is a shameless plug, is on transformative leadership. And in it, I pick up on a theme that I've used for 3 decades now, and that's the notion of vision, focus, and drive. You have to know where you want to go. You have to put the energy and the effort to focus on it very clearly. More broadly, you have to build and bring a team along with you. And then finally, you have to have the drive. And it's just the hard work. It's that persistence to accomplish that. And, maybe one last one, and then I'll let go of this. I don't think leaders can think enough about ethics, because in one form or another, every day, a leader either witnesses or experiences ethical challenges to different degrees, some very small, some very large. But how a leader reacts, how a leader behaves, sends cues into the organization, not just about them as an individual, but about the character and the belief set of the organization. And as I think about that ethical behavior of leaders, to me, it's not what they do when everybody is looking. It's what they do when nobody is looking. And I think that to me is something every great leader that I've known in my career had high ethical standards. And I don't think that was coincidental.
Hey, Bob, this Mark, if I could just kind of piggyback on that one, I think the one that also go hand in hand with that, and I think Dave talked about managing risk and encouraging people to take risk. And if you're not making a mistake, you said it, Bob, you're doing it. And one of the things I think as a leader is you want to create an atmosphere that people bring their challenges, bring their problems and their failures to you. They say that bad news never gets better with age. And how you react, and you talked about it with ethics, but also when there's bad news, when there's a crisis, how you react just tells your organization volumes about your leadership and creates a culture that takes risks, but also knows that you've got their back to support them when things go south.
Yeah, leaders have to be engaged. And I'm a firm believer of management by walking about. Nowadays, it involves planes to other continents, but it's still management by walking about. And I don't think, unless you can see the front line, can experience and feel what the front line is feeling, whether that's in a military setting or a private sector setting, I don't think you really appreciate what the challenges are and what's needed. And when you do that, you're making yourself vulnerable. In some instances physically, and in other circumstances vulnerable in other ways. But leaders have to be vulnerable, and leaders don't know everything. Okay, leaders don't know everything. All of us are smarter than any one of us.
If I could pile on that one, I think a key is that you got to listen. You got to learn to listen, and that's hard for some people. Because to me, it's all about listen, learn, and adapt, and it's about agility. And if like you say, if you have just your view of life, it's not going to work out very well. I had a friend who was in the Navy who had a notebook he always brought to every conference or everything that we ever met, and in big letters it says, never pass up a chance to keep my mouth shut. And it was all about people want to, they want to tell you something, listen to them, and then maybe you can help them beyond that. So I think you're really right on the money. And the other thing I learned was that I always learned more out in the shop than I ever did in the conference room. And I always asked people, how's it going? And they would tell me. I couldn't believe they would even tell me. And I'd say, well, okay, well, I'll get this taken. I'll try to get this taken care of, but you won't hear it back from me, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, I think you're right on the money there.
Dave, there have been many times, and there should have been more, quite frankly, when I'll be in a meeting and you're not the smartest person in the room, but you want to get in and mix it up and the rest of it. And when I did it right on the top sheet of paper in front of me, I would write the word listen. And whenever I had the tendency to want to interrupt, I would look at that. But like I said, I didn't do that enough in my career. I think we have an executive insight on listening as a result of that.
Well, Bob, you and Dave have made the point about listening being very important. I ascribe to that certainly, but also you've made the point about speaking up at the right time. Where's the balance there?
I had at the beginning of my career at Parsons Brinckerhoff, I was brought in to run business development. And I got the bright idea after about 6 months there that it'd be good to have a marketing meeting, which is our marketing staff at the time could all fit in a small conference room very easily with room to spare. But I decided we'd have our CEO make some opening remarks. And he made his opening remarks, very great speaker, very passionate, very compelling vision. I mean, you wanted to follow this guy up the hill, if you will. And we had another senior guy in the room, ex-Corps of Engineers, and he raises his hand with the first question. He says, is there any retribution for the questions you ask? And so the CEO thought carefully and he said, no. And so then the gentleman starts asking his question and the CEO interrupts him and he says, but you have to own them. If you have an opinion, you have to own it. And I think that's true in leaders. Believe me, I've had opinions over the years that I've paid penalties for personally. I look back at those circumstances. I wouldn't change my opinion or change my action of speaking up. And I think time has proven the concerns I was expressing to be correct. But in the moment, it hurt like hell. We'll leave it at that.
Bob, I every year when you're in the Navy, you get a chance to sit down with your boss. He gives you a fitness report. He provides you some feedback. And, there's a few that, kind of made an impression on me as I was going through. And in one of my fitness reports, my reporting senior, he may be on this panel, I don't know. But he wrote something in my fitness report about Mark Hanley expresses his well-considered views. And I think it wasn't that I was actually expressing well-considered views. I think it was a message to me. It was a message to think about, and again, go back, make sure you can own what you talk about. And right. And I think, and again, it made me pause and think about how I communicated issues and think through them and not just come up with the first thing that came out of my mind. And so I think I owned those issues more after that discussion. So I thank Dave for that.
I think what we're talking about is always tell the truth.
Yeah.
And sometimes that hurts and you got to do it. Sometimes you got to be careful about how you deliver the truth, but leaders respect anybody that tells the truth and or feel strongly about what they're doing. Leaders do not respect people who are looking to gain favor by agreeing with the leader. So to me, that's been my experience. I was going to say, when I joined the Navy, in the first meeting I went to, I thought, I'm going to have to be the smartest person in this room or I'll never succeed in this outfit. Well, it proved that I wasn't the smartest person in the room. And so I learned to listen rather than just try to talk and say something stupid.
The two of you just said two things I want to pick up on. So Dave, I think the truth is an essential element in building trust. And smooth running organizations build on trust. And I never served in a combat role, obviously, but when you're under fire of any kind, under pressure of any kind, you have to have a team around you that you trust. And quite frankly, they have to trust you. If you really want them to deliver that, not 110%, that 150% you really need in the circumstance. And then Mark, just going back to your boss who's on the screen here, but it says a couple things to me. First, it says that your boss can be your mentor. And I know there was a period in the industry where it was like you had to have somebody else. It couldn't be your boss. I'll tell you, some of my best mentors in my career were my bosses. The other half were employees that work for me. So you can get good advice from anywhere. You just need to be able to listen to it. And I think that role of mentorship, quite frankly, is something that I think the National Academy of Construction is really trying to provide. Not so much for its members, but more, I think, for the industry more broadly. And I think, we started off with executive insights. We didn't know that we could sustain them. We didn't publish the first one, so we had 12 of them, in the can, ready to go. The idea was we put one out a month and we were good for a year, and maybe we write some more over the first year. Well, there's something like 225 of them that have been published. We expanded that to Ask Me Anything, and the other one, which I'm forgetting right now,
Get the Knack.
Get the Knack, yeah. And each of those targets a slightly different audience with a slightly different delivery form, but the sum total of the experience, the mentorship that the Academy can provide to the industry, I think I don't think you could find it anywhere else, quite frankly.
And I'll build on that and go to the last bullet there a little bit on, for everybody on the webinar today, just, how do you continually learn? And again, the phrase, you're not alone, and you have resources, as Bob said, the National Academy of Construction has executive insights, which are, 3 or 4 page papers on a specific topic in depth. They turn some of those into a podcast. So if that's the way you like to get that information, you get it through podcasts. And then the Ask Me Anything, I think I mentioned at the beginning, is it's essentially a webinar type format with one individual seasoned professional talks about their background, their career, and then is open to questions about, career development, or questions about the industry, things of that nature. And then SAME has tremendous, as I think most of you know, has tremendous opportunities, leader development program that I think Kayla Tucker, who's on our webinar today, helping host this, actually, I think was the instigator behind this today, is in the leader development program. That's probably one of the best in the nation, that program. And then, your companies will have it. I know when I worked at AECOM, we had a leader development program. NAFAC has leader development programs as well, and take advantage of those. And then, I also just say that the best way to develop as a leader is to get experience and get practice. And, SAME is one of those organizations that provides a platform for leader development, not only through the programs, but also through, working at the post level as an officer or, board member on the post presidents, working at one of the national community of interests. There's plenty of opportunities to do it. And, I look at the development of people like Sharon Kroc, for example. When I first met her, she was working at the Academy of Fellows Executive Committee, and then became a national vice president. And I remember at one point when I was president, she was vice president, she goes, "Oh, Mark, I could never do what you're doing up on stage." And then I think this last year, we've seen her perform extremely well on stage, and she's developed. And she's built her network and is probably a better leader within her own company now because of her experience with SAME. And everybody has that experience. But again, you're not alone. You got lots of resources to kind of tap into.
Yeah.
Lloyd, if I might just focus on one thing I think is really important before we run out of time, and that's the succession planning. And both the other gentlemen have said something about it, but to me, it's very key because I think it's one of the most important things a leader does, because we don't last forever. And when you're at my end of the spectrum of age, you see that even more clearly. But when I was in the Navy, I determined there was only 2 things we did. One was ordnance on target, and the other thing was train your relief. And at all levels, we were bringing people on, and we do that in companies. So I think it's really important to evaluate your team members fairly and honestly, meet with them, talk with them about things that they might want to work on. but it's an important concept that I hope you all develop and have or will develop in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Actually, you touched on exactly what I was going to ask you, but let me ask anyway for the three of you. We've talked about sort of senior leadership. We've talked about people developing. Where does leadership, in your perspective, where is leadership in the span of one's career? When do people think of themselves as being leaders and by virtue of being a leader, being impactful for the company? Dave, you want to take that on, then we'll go to Bob and Mark.
Well, I think you start being a leader when you're a little kid, and you develop that over the years. You know, your responsibilities increase, and you learn things, you get better at it. And so to me, leadership is something we all do at different levels. And as we grow, we get more responsibility and it becomes more difficult and has bigger risk. But I think leadership is ingrained in everything we do. And those that don't want to be leaders are certainly welcome to not be leaders, but we need leaders to keep things going.
Yeah, Dave, I think that's spot on. I think leadership begins long before you've gotten out of school. I'll put it that way. I think, growing up as a boy in the Bronx, leadership was, were you leading one of the teams in Roundup, or, it just what it was. And I think when we get into the professional career coming out of college, I see a lot of really talented young professionals who are afraid to take that personal risk. And I think one of the challenges for good leaders in an organization is to spot that potential and, quite frankly, put them in a position where they have to stand up. I shouldn't do this. I have a son who's a young engineer, and he's more introverted than I ever was. And I didn't know that was possible. But but his boss made him go give a presentation at a conference. And he was like, I don't know why I'm doing this. He's on his third presentation now at conferences. He's getting more comfortable with it. So I don't think he'll ever write a dozen books, but there's hope yet by his father. So
As long as he's not on your payroll, it's okay.
He's off my payroll now, so this is very good.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I think, it can start in Little League. It can start in, the soccer team. It can start wherever. I don't know if I thought of it as leadership, but I know I got lots of leadership opportunities, whether it was through Explorer Scouts or through sports when I was young. And then I do remember when I was, you get reminded of it from time to time. And one of the reminders that got me, I think I was at Villanova in the ROTC program, and I had just finishing my senior year, and they had an awards, and I got an award, and I didn't know what I was getting or why, and it was from the Knights of Columbus, and it was a very simple plaque, but it just said, for leadership through adherence to Christian principles. And again, I was at Villanova, it's a Catholic university, and oddly enough, I kept that on my wall in my Navy career for 32 years. Every office I held, as a reminder that, hey, you got to remember that you're also here as a leader, and I think it grows over time. You get more and more opportunities to take different positions and more impactful positions as you get more experience.
Lloyd, I have one leadership story I want to tell here. So after I left Parsons Brinckerhoff, I joined Fluor, and Fluor at that time would hold a meeting of their entire executive management team every 3 years. It was a big deal. It was like a 4-day thing. This one happened to be out at the Marine base in California, and I was the new kid, literally. In fact, my official start date was a week after the meeting. So I went out there, and we're sitting around at tables, and they defined that the dozen people sitting at that round table, you were now a team. These are people I had never met. Most of them didn't even know each other because it was a very big organization. And then near the end of the briefing of what we were going to do, which was play paintball, they said, okay, reach under your chair. If there's an envelope under your chair, you're in charge of the team. So lucky me, I reach under and I have the envelope. So now I'm going to supervise 11 senior folks who've been with Fluor from around the world, and I'm going to take them out into the paintball field. Long story short, we won. Okay, we played 3 battles. We won all 3 battles. We got the award for that. I will tell you, in that leadership instance, was a great way not only to demonstrate your own personal leadership, but quite frankly, to get known by everybody in the firm in half a day. And I think part of that leadership development process we all go through is being in a situation where you're standing up, if you will, in front of others, and you're doing something, and others are saying to themselves, I like him. He's a good guy. I can follow him. And I think that's part of that leadership development process. As more senior leaders, we have to put young professionals in situations so they can reach under their chairs and find the envelope and lead a team.
But Bob, you told us earlier you didn't have combat experience, but obviously you have combat experience in paintball. It probably came from the Bronx, that growing up in the Bronx.
It did, but those stories can't be told. So
All right. So a lot of good substance. Now we're going to have to move on. This last bullet we've talked to a little bit more already, but let's go to the next slide. We'll talk a little more about that. Okay. Here's the way in which each of you that are on this webinar, regardless of your status within the company, can continue to progress. Mark, can you talk a little bit about the first one, and then Dave, if you'll pick up the or Bob, if you'll pick up the second, and then Dave the third, please, and I'll close it out.
Yeah. So a number of years ago, SAME started the leader development program, and it turned into a leader development community of interest. And again, it started out as a small task force, and we had the first one, highly successful. And I just say that it's a cohort every year that we pull in and go through a pretty significant leadership development curriculum, webinars, a major project that they do. But I'll just offer, I think Ree, you put something in the comments in the chat that there's the monthly webinar is this Friday, 11:30 Eastern time, and it's open to all SAME members. So even though you're not in that cohort, you participate in the leadership development community of interest. And I think it goes back to just being, kind of I always like to say, everyone needs to be a disciple of leadership. You need to study it, you need to practice it, you need to be involved in it. And if you're not, what was it, Bob? If you're not growing, you're dying.
that's
right.
it.
And the same thing goes with your leadership skills. If you think you've got enough leadership and you're just going to ride on your coast on your laurels, you're sorely mistaken. You need to continually develop that, and you'll learn something from other people. And again, the community of interest is a great venue to do that.
Thanks, Mark.
So,
Bob.
yeah, so just a couple comments on the National Academy of Construction. I think they've heard a lot already. I'll just offer a couple things. About 2/3 of the membership of the NAC are either fully or semi-retired. About 1/3 are still active in the industry. But I think they will have one characteristic, which is their willingness to give back, to contribute to the industry. And each of us does it in different ways, but all of us do it, I think, is important. The various tools that we've mentioned, like Executive Insights and Ask Me Anything, are available to you. They're free. Go online, search. Lloyd had dropped me a note about, I guess, one of my, I think one of my Executive Insights, or one of my papers that later got turned into an Executive Insight, that you found rummaging through some old papers of yours. And I hear that comment, Lloyd, from many in the industry, and not just about the Executive Insights I've written, but by the Executive Insights others have written out there. I read every one that gets published out there, and I'm still learning from the peer group in NAC. So strong, valuable resource. You can use it, you can copy it, you can republish it. I don't think there's any constraints, if I remember correctly. Just use it, take advantage of it. And if you reach out to an NAC member, you have a good chance of getting a response. So I'll leave it at that, Lloyd.
Dave?
Yeah, I just, as a guy who's joined every organization that's been founded since 1950, I get an opportunity to sample a lot of them, and they're all very, very helpful, and they all seem to have the same focus, and that is that they're all about trying to improve the profession and improve the industry, and so I encourage you. There's a lot of opportunity there, and join, or if you're already in, take advantage of what they have. And if you're like me, who keeps working on getting my PDHs for professional engineering, there's lots of opportunity out there to get very inexpensive PDHs.
Thanks, Dave. And then I'll just close out this slide by mentioning the vendors. Now, there's a cost associated with these vendors. Here are a few that I've had some engagement with over the years. Find them helpful, and you can access these either on an individual basis or on a team basis or a company basis, and they will help assess your leadership practices and give you advice about how to grow as a leader. Next slide, please. So these are the keys to success that the panel addressed. We're going to go to questions now. This is just a quick recap here and for you to see what the points were. So now, Steve, if we can go to the on-screen for the panel to answer the questions, please. Thank you. Okay, Steve, it's yours.
You ready? Okay, so Kayla put something in there. Just if you have questions, throw them in the chat. Elena put one in. With evolving tech and AI, what's your approach to staying future ready? And I think, Bob, you kind of touched on that a little bit.
Yeah, let me make a prefacing comment before I answer directly. If you go to the Executive Insights on the National Academy of Construction, there's 4 or 5 already that speak to artificial intelligence from some different concerns and perspectives. There's one on AI ethics. There's one which is really a pure, I'll call it engineering challenge, which is if I do a nice, great, very interesting design with using AI, how do I validate that design? It's no longer a deterministic solution, it's a probabilistic solution. There's also a number of executive insights there on construction 4.0 and convergence of various technologies. I think that's been published as well. I sit on a board of a Saudi company, and we're putting a lot of effort into 2 things. I think one, understanding how we have to embrace AI in doing our own business, but more important, what are the business opportunities that it represents? Dave, this may be one of your startups before we're done here, but and I have written extensively about artificial intelligence. I spent a lot of time studying it. I have a paper coming out next month in an online journal that looks at tools specific to the engineering and construction industry. They're AI enabled. So this is a rapidly developing area. If we think back just 2 years ago, it was all ChatGPT. Today, that's 5% of what the capabilities are out there in the AI space. So I would urge you as individuals to experiment with AI. Start with chat, go beyond it. As organizations, you have to, or you might as well plan the sale of your organization now. I'll kind of stop there. I think I kind of got around the question.
Yeah, but Bob, I'd also add, and I think this applies to any technology. I think where I found the most success, if you want to be on the leading edge, but you don't necessarily want to be on the bleeding edge.
Yes.
You know, the person who says this is the coolest thing ever and just dives all their resources into it, and then they go upside down. And but you definitely want to stay, ahead. If you sit there and wait until it's fully developed, then you're going to be left behind. And so you need to continually evolve and again be a little bit on the leading edge of it.
One of the conditions, one of the human conditions, if you will, I believe, is curiosity. I think every individual has a level of curiosity. Often, in the past, especially, it might be hard to satisfy that curiosity. You had to go to university and study for 5 years, or you had to go to the stacks in a library and look for the dustiest book you could find. Today, quite frankly, get on chat, get good at asking the prompts. And I will tell you, I've found myself sometimes sitting out back, curious about something I've been thinking about, just going on chat. And after a while, I have to remember I'm not talking to a person, but I'm having a very interesting discussion. And I don't take anything at face value, without challenge. But I have to tell you, I walk away from those quotes conversations with something to think about. And I think that's very empowering, not just for the individual, but for the organizations. Dave talks about risk. When you want to sit in those other half dozen seats around the table, there's a way to adopt those perspectives in the queries you make. So
Now let me just add to a point that Mark and Bob, I think, made about this, and that is my recommendation is that you think about critical thinking. So accepting things at face value may not be the best practice. You've got to really give some thought to it to see if it is what it appears cracked up to be.
Or as we say in the Navy, does it pass the giggle test?
Okay,
Steve,
great.
next
Ready for the
question.
next one?
Yeah,
All right.
please.
How would you encourage a junior team member who may be, who may be shy, but has great leadership potential to step into more leader roles?
put them up on the stage and give them a task to do and watch what they do.
Voluntold.
Look, I still remember the first time I gave a presentation. It was a big deal. I look back now, I was talking about something that was about as mundane as you could get, but it was a big deal. And I was very, very nervous. I mean, physically very nervous. And I discovered along the way that nervous energy actually helps you deal with situations like that, helps you give good presentations. The presenter that gets up there and doesn't have a little bit of trepidation about what's to happen, either has been doing it too long or really just is going to have a case of verbal diarrhea, I think. And neither one are really good for you.
The other one I would offer is when you're talking to someone and you're trying to get them to take that next leap to another leadership level, I think it's also about, kind of creating a vision of what that future is going to be like for them and show them a path to get there. And it may take 2 steps to get to where you want them to go, but show them the path. And when they can see that same vision of what that future looks like, then that's usually when inspiration kind of kicks in and they get over any trepidation that they had about taking that responsibility.
I have a more simple-minded answer. You talk to them and say, you've got great potential, and then you kind of start the conversation so they begin to understand that they do have a possibility they might be where they want to be someday.
And I would just add to the panel that if you're talking about yourself, you're thinking about yourself, be willing to step out of your comfort zone. And every time you step out of your comfort zone and take something on that makes you a little bit uncomfortable, prepare for it so you can do it the best you can, but understanding it may not be perfect. You're still going to grow from that each effort that you put into it.
And sometimes it may be a disaster, but you can learn from that too.
Roger. Okay, Steve.
All right, great. What ways can a leader best see the front line in order to appreciate it?
I'll start with that one. As you go there,
Yeah.
I used to, when there was a public works center, and I used to go down with the crew that was on and did 24-hour responses to broken toilets and all that stuff. And these guys and gals really thought that was special. And somebody even thought to come around to spend a few hours with them. And so, it's just go there and be there. And one of the things that I believe, particularly the farther you get from the front line, you need to be there. You need to talk to them. You need to understand what their concerns are. And a lot of times they'll give you tips about things that need to be fixed.
I think, Dave, one other thing I saw in my career was a lot of times I would be, in an executive sponsor role or something like that, especially later in the career. And so, you're going to go meet in the office and they're going to tell you all about the project, which is, 5 miles away. And maybe they're going to take you out there and they're going to give you the very nice drive around. Well, the second we hit the site and they went in to get the badges, I got out of the car. And I would always walk around, especially near that front gate, if you will. And I would look for one thing: was there trash around? Okay, because a site that was disorganized, wasn't well maintained, was a symptom of a bigger issue. And I had one case. The site happened to be in New York, and it was a very big owner, and the site was a disaster. And I was not, in fact, I didn't even wait for the badge. I wasn't challenged. I went up 2 stories in this building, which was under construction, walked around. Nobody challenged me. I had a suit on. Okay. I had a hard hat on, but I had a suit on. I definitely did not belong there. Nobody challenged me. Okay. And people were doing things that I'm not sure they knew what they were doing. And the financial results on that project proved that to be the case. It was a project that had a $20 million overrun out of about a $100 million budget.
Mhm.
And it just was not well managed. It was not well maintained. People weren't motivated. So, but Dave, you don't see that unless you're out there. And I think that's the key point.
Steve?
Okay, we got one more here. I'm gonna try to paraphrase this. Could you comment on leading a team where some members are very inflexible, but the inflexible often dictate due to being forceful?
Well, I'll start with that one. I, worked with people like that. A lot of times people that are forceful and have an opinion are willing to do what needs to be done. They just want to hear it. They want you to hear about it. So it's more therapy than anything else. So you listen carefully, and when you're done, they know you're going to do whatever has to be done, but they feel better because they got a chance to express their concern, and they won't be responsible if it all fails, but they'll do what needs to be done.
Dave, just building on that, I think, you want to give them that opportunity to express that opinion. But I think you owe it to the rest of the team to give them that same opportunity. And I think by the time you've gone around that circle, those 6, 8 people all expressing their views, and you get back to the guy who was the intransient one, you'll find his position has moved a little bit because he's had the opportunity to be informed by a bunch of other people who most likely he has some level of respect for. The other thing is sometimes that intransient person is right. And as a leader, you have to be willing to recognize, gee, he's got a good idea here, or he's got a better approach, and I got to be flexible.
Well, I'll add one comment on that unless you have one, Mark. Or maybe you can add to what I say. I would say that one of the things we have to do is ensure that people feel respected in the process, and that's a little bit of what Bob's getting to. There's an element of truth in what they're talking about. Their motives are likely good motives when they're part of a business and a team. In other words, they're not trying to screw things up, so they've got a legitimate reason in their mind for saying what they're saying and advocating for what they're advocating. So it's really important to listen to them and help them understand that you respect their positions, even if ultimately you go in a different direction.
But there always comes a time when you have to make a decision. And, if you've done all these things we've talked about and you got to go ahead, you got to go ahead.
Yeah. But, if you make that decision and there's continual resistance and undermining, and if this is a pattern, then you have to know when to weed the garden. And those are hard decisions you got to make. But at some point you have to say, he's not supporting the team, he's not supporting the decisions, or she's not doing it. And then you have to weed the garden. and you can't let it go on. It will not get better with age. You make sure you give it all the opportunity to succeed, but at some point you have to weed the garden.
I think that's a key point, Mark. I think all of us in our careers have had to relieve people of their responsibilities, if you will, and that's never easy. And in fact, if it's easy, I think you have a problem.
Yeah.
I think it has to be hard, and I think that keeps the bar at an appropriate level. But you have to weed the garden sometimes, as you say.
Steve,
All right, next question. What's one thing leaders often overlook when developing others?
I'm going to start with that. I think sometimes it's culture. And if you've got people that, that have been involved in a certain culture and they have a view of things and others have other views, you got to listen and you got to understand the environment that everybody's coming. I'm not talking about, anything other than just where they've been brought up, where they went to school, what they've learned, what kind of experiences they've been through, so that you don't just view everybody based on your frame of reference.
I think that's important, Dave. There's a tendency to try to see ourselves in others, and that kind of ignores the fundamental uniqueness of every person. But on the culture point, I want to make one point. So, I've been in 54 countries in my lifetime. I've negotiated in almost every one of them in some form or another. And I got some sound advice at a point in my career that I needed to do a better job of understanding the cultures that I was operating in. And those cultures today, even here inside the US, can be very different, and certainly generationally can be very different. But there was a book at the time that was recommended to me called Cross-Cultural Dialogues. And, it did the negotiating with the Japanese, negotiating with the Koreans and the Australians and the Russians and it did all that. But when you got done with the book, and it wasn't a big book, but when you got done with the book, you kind of uh, got to the point of understanding or recognizing that you needed to understand the context in which the party on the other side of the conversation was coming from. And it may not be the same as you. If you're talking to a boy from the Bronx and you're from, I don't want to pick a place, but if you're from a much wealthier community, your frame of reference is going to be different than what mine was growing up. And how you look at the world is going to be different. So I think that does matter.
Steve,
All right. You kind of touched on this, Bob, but what books did you find most influential in growing your leadership skills?
How about All I Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten? That was a good one.
Yeah, I think mine actually, I don't remember the exact title, but it was on an early book on organizational theory and behavior. And the number one management style, chapter one, was MBWA, Management by Walking About. I will say I did read the rest of the book, but I really like chapter one. And I think that MBWA approach has kind of stuck with me. And then just the second one I mentioned just now, which was the cross-cultural dialogues, which I think served me well. And if I'm honest with you, I think I like the first book I wrote best of all. So
Bestseller now. Hey,
Available on Amazon, by the way.
I'm going to throw two out there. Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. The chapter on leadership is probably one of the best chapters on leadership that I've read. And the other one was a book that was recommended to me by one of my mentors. And it was interesting. I didn't like the book when I first read it, but when I first looked at it, because it says the 10 worst mistakes leaders make. And I went, why do I want to study the 10 worst mistakes? And then what I learned in that was when you're working for a great leader, you kind of say, God, this guy's great. He's fabulous. And you don't always, remember everything he did that made it great. You're like trying to figure it out. When you work for a bad leader and you get something that you are ingrained, I am never going to do that. Right? If you see, someone who's, belittles somebody in public, for example, and say, God, I'm never going to do that. And it was interesting because the first lesson in there was, here are 10 things that we learned never to do, right? But it actually gave me more appreciation to pay attention to the good leaders, as opposed to, I always paid attention, everybody pays attention to the bad leaders because they like to talk about how bad they were. But if you got it, kind of the backward side of it was, it got me thinking more about the good leaders that I work for and how to emulate what they did. So.
One of the things I think in all of these books is that the inside them, in the delivery of the material, there's effectively some case studies or case histories or little vignettes of stories. And I think the art of storytelling is something that leaders actually have. I think great leaders, I think, tell stories well. I really do, because it's the oldest form of transfer of knowledge in humanity. Sitting around the campfire, having just slayed whatever you just slayed, and telling the stories of the hunt. And I think those stories become very, very important. So, something I'll recommend to young leaders, if there's some young leaders on here, you probably already have a couple stories you tell from time to time. As you get older, they get harder to remember. So write them down. I now have a Word document that's called Stories I Like to Tell. In certain settings, I'll go out and actually read the stories I like to tell and be, oh yeah, that'd be a good one to tell people. So start building your future reference material right now.
I've been through all the fads. I even taught total quality management for a while and all that sort of stuff. And I finally figured out what it's all about is how if you can interact with other people and how you interact with other people. And you can figure that out on your own. It's common sense, because it's about how you like to be treated. And to me, that's one of the keys. And there's lots of fads, and there'll continue to be a lot of fads. And read all of Bob's books, because they're very good. But there's some of this stuff that just kind of hogwash. And I would, be very critical as I picked out books to read and what I took on as my, persona.
Yeah, great point, Dave. Okay, Steve, do you have more for us?
Actually, that was the last question. So if we got any closing remarks, we can do those now.
See if any of the panel wants any closing remarks before we go to the last slide. Anything?
If I can, Lloyd, just a source for good lessons learned across a wide range of subjects, but I think in them, if you pay close attention to what you're reading, leadership. I know West Point has, and I assume the Navy and Air Force have equivalent things. West Point has a set of battle histories going all the way back to, the first recorded battles that talk about not just, these are the units that were involved and this is how they attacked and counterattacked and outflanked, and not just that, but embedded in there are threads that speak to how decisions were being made, what objectives were trying to be accomplished. There were two case histories, one Air Force, one Navy, that I read a few years back. One was the Army one. I'm sorry, the Air Force one was about the Atlas missile program, and the other one was about the rollout of the nuclear submarine fleet. So the development of the missile and the simultaneous development of a sub that can launch it. I have to tell you, the management lessons and leadership lessons embedded in those, and I happen to like the Navy one better than the Air Force one, because I think it showed a broader sense of management, because part of it was managing Congress, if you will. And I think those kinds of well thought through histories especially successful histories. I think you'll learn a lot from those. And that material's readily available, I would think, to anybody in the SAME community.
My closing remark is I hope this has been worth your time to listen to. It's we intended just to convey what we do and what we'd experienced and how we gotten as far as we've got. So I hope it was worthwhile to you and so you are now our successors. So we expect you to go do great things.
And I'll just offer, we've probably shown you the tip of the iceberg of what resources are available through SAME, National Academy of Construction. And I would just say, take advantage of the resources, and whenever you need, you're going to find experts out there. And most commonly, when you ask for help, they'll reach back out and help.
Well, that's a great cue to go to the next slide, please, Steve. So the panel has placed their email addresses there. They've indicated that they're open if you want to reach out to them for further questions. So very generous of all of these folks. And speaking for the panel, I'll say it's been a great session today. So thank you, Chelsea and Stephen, for your support with this. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you. We really appreciate it. Obviously, your time is very valuable, and we do really appreciate all the insight that we've got, and hopefully everybody on the call is going to take something away. So, and we'll have it recorded so you can listen to it again, which is always a good thing. So, yes, nothing else is needed. We'll just end this one, and thank you, everyone, presenters and participants.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
Have a great day.